Hello, friends and neighbors, and thank you for joining me today for our poem of the day on Wednesday, October the 1st, 2025. I'm going to continue with a second poem of Seamus Heaney's that I would like to read and share with you all. We're not going to do at this time a longer exploration of his work, though I think that would be time very well spent and a wonderful thing that I would like to do, and that I'm sure many of you would find rewarding as well. But really, there was just two poems on my mind of his that I wanted to share, and that are both in this really wonderful collection. The selected poems from his early years. This is from 1966 to 1987. It's a two-book series. And the second poem, yesterday I read Digging from Death of a Naturalist from 1966. And the second poem is also from Death of a Naturalist from 1966. And the poem is called Death of a Naturalist. This is another poem that is very famous, quite frequently anthologized, quite frequently read on its own as a representation of Heaney's work. And so that's the poem I'd like to share with you all today. This is Death of a Naturalist by Seamus Heaney. All year the flax dam festered in the heart of the townland. Green and heavy-headed, flax had rotted there, weighted down by huge sods. Daily it sweltered in the punishing sun. Bubbles gargled delicately. Bluebottles wove a strong gauze of sound around the smell. There were dragonflies, spotted butterflies. But best of all was the warm, thick slobber of frog spawn that grew like clotted water in the shade of the banks. Here, every spring I would fill jam potfuls of the jellied specks to range on windowsills at home, on shelves at school, and wait and watch until the fattening dots burst into nimble, swimming tadpoles. Miss Walls would tell us how the daddy frog was called a bullfrog, and how he croaked, and how the mammy frog laid hundreds of little eggs, and this was frog spawn. You could tell the weather by frogs, too, for they were yellow in the sun and brown in the rain. Then one hot day, when fields were rank with cow dung and the grass, the angry frogs invaded the flax dam. I ducked through hedges to a coarse croaking that I had not heard before. The air was thick with a bass chorus. Right down the dam, gross-bellied frogs were cocked on sods. Their loose necks pulsed like sails. Some hopped. The slap and plop were obscene threats. Some sat poised like mud grenades, their blunt heads farting. I sickened, turned, and ran. The great slime kings were gathered there for vengeance, and I knew that if I dipped my hand, the spawn would clutch it. All right. So the title of the poem, which is also the title of the collection, asks us to ponder it. First, what is a naturalist? And I think in this case, this is not a great definition of it, but someone being in nature, someone appreciating nature, being one with nature, loving nature, seeing nature on its own terms. And so this poem suggests for us that within it, there is going to be that death. And I think that because the death is not literal, it represents a loss of innocence. It represents the death of childlike wonder and curiosity that can be tied to experiencing nature as wondrous and full of life, and to experience it without judgment. This is a two-stanza poem. The first stanza is longer than the second. And I think that at the break in the two stanzas is the moment where this death occurs, because the first stanza contains things in it, diction and imagery, that are, I think, far more innocent and observational and celebratory. We get things like green and heavy-headed, bubbles gargling delicately, bluebottles weaving a strong gauze of sound around the smell, which is a really interesting synesthesia, to weave a gauze of sound around the smell, just linking sound and smell together in that single line. Dragonflies, butterflies, and then even perhaps the grossest image in here, which is the thick slobber of frog spawn, is described as the best of all, right? That we hear it's the best of all is the frog spawn. And the speaker then, every spring would go and fill these jam pots filled with this, fascinated by it, and would take them home and watch on the windowsill at home as the frogs grew, as the frogs spawned, take them to school. But then there's this break, and I think that because that stanza is longer, the speaker or the writer in the present wants to return to that. I believe that they're privileging that perspective towards nature and that attitude and alignment towards nature because it was something that was more pure, and it's something that they wish they could return to. There's almost a kind of Catholic mythology to this, which is not too much of a stretch to suggest for an Irish poet, but that there was like a union with nature before the break, before the death of the naturalist, before they were cast out of Eden and saw things as good and bad and not just the way that they were. And I believe that that happens at the stanza break, because right after the stanza break, we get one hot day, the fields were rank with cow dung. It's a horrible smell, right? Angry frogs. And so the person is, as the frogs are invading the flagstem, it's almost like an army, right? And so the speaker is fleeing the coarse croaking that they had not heard before. Of course, you've heard frogs before, but now it sounds like coarse croaking to you. You're hearing it differently, and you're hearing it with a negative connotation, with a certain judgment. The frogs are described as being cocked, right? Almost like a weapon, like a gun, ready to launch or ready to fire. There's a slap and plop of obscene threats, which is personifying the frogs, of course, but it's also projecting that you're hearing something that is kind of neutral. We could think back to Elizabeth Bishop's Five Flights Up and the way that the bird and the dog are asking questions of one another that the human kind of yells at the dog for, right? And there's a similar attitude here of these obscene threats that the speaker is projecting onto the frogs. Then we get this really, I think, just wonderful and funny line. Some sat poised like mud grenades. So there's our war imagery, our violent imagery again, within that simile. Their blunt heads farting, which I think is just funny because it says fart. But the croak now has gone from a coarse croak to a fart sound. So I think we're still kind of in the voice of a child, but we're in a voice of a child who is unable to kind of hear things the way they are, and instead hears them as something that is kind of tied with the smell of the cow dung in the flax bog, or sorry, the flax dam, and is almost assuming that the frogs are kind of producing that, and this sickens them, and they run away again. Because they imagine the great slime kings, which is such a wonderful phrase for these frogs, the great slime kings. I feel like that'd be a great name for like an indie band. Were gathered there for vengeance. And frogs, as far as we know, they don't have a will for vengeance. What is the speaker seeing in the vengeance here? Is it a vengeance for the way that the young man has left them? Is it a vengeance for stealing all of their babies, all of their frog spawn? But then the last line that really is the reason why he's fleeing is, I knew that if I dipped my hand, the spawn would clutch it. Now, so that's a desire to not want to be one with nature the way that he was before, because he used to scoop all this frog spawn off. And now I knew that if I put my hand in there, it's going to touch it and gross. And I don't want that. I'm going to recoil and be repulsed by that. Why? What changed? And I think what changed that is not said in here, what's implied in the silence of the stanza break, we can get to from what happens at the end of the first stanza. So the speaker, remember, takes this jar of the tadpoles of the frog spawn into school, and we get this. Miss Walls would tell us how the daddy frog was called a bullfrog, and how he croaked, and how the mammy frog laid hundreds of little eggs, and this was frog spawn. So when he collected the frog spawn earlier, he didn't really know what it was, other than you could just watch it kind of expand and turn into frogs. It's after this that we have the death of the naturalist, which I think is tied to a loss of innocence, because it's a little bit of a coming of age, but it's a loss of innocence where the speaker again is kind of cast out of a perfect union with nature, if we want to think in those Christian terms again. But it's also a loss of innocence in the sense where as you grow up, you learn certain things that when you learn them, they cannot be unlearned, and they kind of change the way you see things, and they demystify the world, and they make you wish that you were back in the state of innocence from before. Two things I can think of off the top of my head from my own life were learning that Santa wasn't real, was something that for me was very disturbing, because the world was then disenchanted and demystified, and my parents had been lying to me. And I remember that as a moment of development in my consciousness that was very significant. The other is learning what sex was, where before, yeah, you know that there's mommies and daddies and there's children and families go together, but you don't really ask the question of where things come from. And then you learn at some point where people come from, and you learn then where you came from. And when you're young, that's really gross. You don't understand the beauty of it and the potential in it for beauty, and that one day you're going to also participate in this. Instead, it seems when you're a young person to just kind of sully everything that seemed so innocent and perfect and clean and held together for you. And I think that's what happens to the speaker in this poem that's not spoken, because Miss Walls, who's being a good teacher, a good science teacher, explains to the speaker, when a mommy frog and a daddy frog love one another, here's what happens. Not to say that that's the exact moment that the speaker then can extrapolate that onto human beings, but I think that it stands in as kind of a microcosm of coming of age and losing the innocence, of realizing these things that are important aspects of life that can be just kind of worldview and paradigm shifting for you at the time. And so the things that you see after that, at least for a while, become nasty and disgusting and grotesque and off-putting. And you don't want to touch the things that you touched before. You don't want to be touched by the spawn, because the frog spawn is a reminder to you of those kind of nasty cootie things, right? If this poem went on longer, which it doesn't, I can imagine that the naturalist settles back in. Maybe doesn't become a naturalist again, but certainly doesn't see their blunt heads farting and the great slime kings looking at them for vengeance. But this poem is not, I don't think it's just about learning what sex is. I think it's also about obviously echoing a lot of what's in Digging, which is to say that this is somebody who's going to be separate from the land, a part of nature, but apart from nature at the same time there. That's all I'll say about the poem. There's more to say about it. Again, Heaney has such wonderful sensory imagery within his poems that have a wonderful sonic quality to them, and that evoke multiple senses in a way that you can really, as a reader, picture this and insert yourself into it. Even if you don't get to the deeper levels of the symbolism or the quote unquote hidden meaning, I hate that phrase, but I hear that a lot. It's very easy to comprehend just the story on a description level. And I think that makes his poems very inviting, that they work on multiple levels. He's obviously a brilliant poet, Nobel Prize recipient. But even if you don't get to the depths that we got to in just 14 minutes, and there are deeper depths to go to, I think his poems are still very rewarding, just on their aesthetic beauty and aesthetic quality. That'll probably be all the Heaney we do for a while, as I'll return to Bishop for the next 2 days before turning toward some more spooky stuff. But I hope you enjoyed this very brief dip into Irish poetry. I hope to read more Heaney soon and explore more of his wonderful work. And thank you again for being here with me. Happy October to everyone. I hope you're able to enjoy fall-like weather and some wonderful tea and coffee and some warm sweaters. And until next time, may peace be with you.